Welcome. Whoa, welcome everybody. So let's get on with the introductions. Since I know everyone's anxious to get to the main event, Mike Dominguez, let's make this short and sweet. I'm going to go around introducing each one of our virtual nerds, and I would like to hear your favorite one-word greeting, such as hi, hey, howdy. Even short phrases are acceptable, like what's up or top of the morning, as long as they're like slurred together so it sounds like one word. Jeff Rasco.
Howdy, y'all.
Good one. Christina Rasco.
Hey, good morning.
No, that's too long. Jill Rasco.
Hiya.
And last but not least, our virtual bouncer, Jennifer Rasco Smith.
But we shorten it up and use GM for good morning.
I feel like explaining it made it too long. Now the introductions of the AMI nerds are out of the way. Hey, Mike.
Good morning. And mine, by the way, is always hello, my friends.
We're so happy you could join us today. Just in case anyone doesn't know you, can you give us a little background on who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm currently working with Associated Luxury Hotels. We're a global sales organization for the independent side of our business as far as the hotel world. So we handle and represent independent hotels and independent hotel brands. When I say independent hotel brands, those would be hotel companies that own and manage their own buildings, which are rare today. So those would be the MGMs of the world, Lowe's of the world, Omni, Kempinski, a little bit of a different makeup than your traditional flag hotels. And then my past experience, I've been in the hotel business for 30 years, my entire life. So variety of different organizations. I've been told I have a 7-year itch because I spent 7 years with Lowe's and 7 years with MGM before coming here. And it was 7 years to the day, by the way, that I signed the offer letter to come to Alhi to leave MGM from when I had left Lowe's to MGM. So I don't know how that works and why it worked out that way, but it just did.
I remember that announcement that morning. We were at, I think it was WEC, and social media had gone berserk.
Yeah, it was interesting because there's an interesting story there, and you know my sometimes my feelings about the media, but I was leaving MPI WEC early on that Tuesday. I was going to miss the president's dinner so I could come home and resign with my team. I wanted to tell them personally before the announcements went out. But one of our publications in our industry got a hold of it. I called the publisher. I asked them to have the decency to wait so I could speak to my team, and they refused. And they were going to put it out anyway. So I had to resign that afternoon or get my team together to let them know the announcement was coming out the next day. Had to do it by phone from Toronto. And I also didn't want it to take away from the honoree that evening, Christine Duffy, that was being honored, because I know it would be talk. And I was trying to avoid all of that. I was going to resign on Wednesday after all that was done and let my team know, but that all got turned sideways. So yeah, it was an interesting one. But that is like my that's my work life, my personal life. Been married 31 years, have 3 great kids, 2 great grandkids, and became a very young parent and a very young grandparent. So became a grandfather at 38 years old. So it's
Hey, Mike, a question came in before we even opened registration, or part of registration was, could you tell us something about your favorite pig?
My favorite pig? Yeah. You know, it's funny. That is, I think we determined at Alhi that it is now our mascot, and it is. His name is Albert. It's Albert the pig, and in our neighborhood, my wife and I walk every night. We have this neighborhood that's really built for it. One of our neighbors has a pet pig, and Albert is always in this yard, comes out and spends usually the evenings there. He's eating the grass. You'll see videos where he's always munching on that grass. When he's really munching, he doesn't even pay attention to me, even when I call him. But if I call his name, he'll grunt. And he knows his name. He goes to the door. Funniest thing is he'll go to the door just like a dog. and he'll be grunting and whining until they let him in. But you'll see him. There's two other dogs that come out and they kind of bounce around. And yeah, Carrie just put up Albert. That's Albert there. He is one big pig, by the way. He is massive, but has a personality, and you'll call him depending on his mood. He'll come walking right up to you and then start grunting and whining. So that's the story of Albert. Nothing there. I'm probably going to be arrested because I'm the creep that's going to their house and filming every day. So outside of that, it's no real story there. Albert's become my buddy.
That's great. Well, now that all the hard-hitting questions are out of the way, we had a lot of good questions come in. Let's just start off with kind of a general one. How do you see the meetings industry being affected long-term?
I don't think long-term is the biggest question, is short-term. Between now and the end of 2020, we have, and I just got off our Apex Recovery Task Force call. We have a lot of planners that are trying to figure out how to move forward and how to explain to their stakeholders how they're going to move forward in a manner that is safe and also effective for what they're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of pieces to this. And I'll tell you, I said something on the call. One of the biggest pieces that's going to come out of this that you're going to see first is a code of conduct that's been established as well. And the code of conduct is you have a responsibility as an attendee. All the responsibilities been put on are, what are the venues doing? What are the airlines doing? Well, that's great, but if we're setting up a great environment and we're putting in 6-foot separation and then you refuse to stay away from people, it's all for naught. And there is a responsibility that's shared here. And the reason I state that, I guarantee you some of you saw this yesterday, and I pointed it out. On LinkedIn, there was this picture and somebody posted 3 buckets with 3 different colored bands. And if you're okay high-fiving and shaking hands, here's this. And if you want people, that is the worst idea you could ever imagine right now. And yet there were meeting planners like crazy saying, oh, I love this idea. This is so creative. It is a really bad idea in this environment. That is telling people, I don't care if you're comfortable. You need to stay away if we are creating environments, and those are the regulations right now. And that's getting back to this code of conduct. But our industry gets excited with creativity. And I said, really creative. And in normal times, I'd love it. But guess what? Really misplaced right now. And I said, we're trying to convince government, local officials, and more importantly, we're trying to convince the people that may be afraid to travel and come to meetings that we're creating safe environments. All you need is one picture of people high-fiving and shaking hands, and that's all thrown out the window. Everything we're saying, we're creating an environment, and it's no different than you seeing a United airline plane packed to the gills when the airline said we were going to leave middle seats open. And people are starting to venture out and say, okay, I'm going to go travel because they're not going to pack the planes. And yet the pictures that go viral are the pictures of the planes being packed. That's where there's some danger in this, but moving out of it right now, meetings are happening. We have meetings happening between now and the year. One of our resorts we talked to yesterday, they have a 200-person meeting in 2 weeks, 700-person meeting literally in 4 weeks. I can tell you our Universal properties, they have a 500-person meeting coming up in 3 weeks. And that 500-person meeting, literally when they opened up registration, they had 400 people register within the first 4 days of the 500 people. So this tone of nobody's going to travel, it's just not true. We're seeing it. Every property that's open, and I'll give you a great example. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to get away for July 4th. Everybody sold out. Everybody I wanted to go see, even Houston. I was just trying, even this weekend, I'm trying to get to Houston because my son is there, and we're going to go see my son. He's moving into a house, and I reach out to our friends at the Woodlands, and they go, Mike, we only have a few rooms left. And I go, please make money. I'm good. Make lots of money. Don't give me any discounts. Sell the room full rack to somebody. I go, I'll stay with my son. It's just he was moving in. Everywhere I'm looking, they're sold out on the weekends. Midweek, they still need the group business, and especially in the resort communities. And that's a little slower coming back. The major cities, it's business travel that's slower coming back. And then I would separate the country. The Northeast corridor is just right now coming out of lockdown, while you have other parts of the country that have already been moving. So it's a little bit of a mixed story and a mixed storyline. And unfortunately, even the storylines coming out now are making it problematic. You know, you may have seen yesterday, New York is now restricting travel from most of the southern states, including Texas. You now have a 14-day quarantine if you go to New York. Well, nobody's going to go to New York. You know, nobody has 14 days to give to say, I'm going to go to New York and travel. So that's basically them saying we're not opening up travel into our market for a large portion of the country. I think some of it was a tit for tat, because if you recall, Florida and some southern states were restricting people from the tri-state area when they were in the middle of their peak. And, you know, what people don't put a reference to is, okay, Texas got to 5,000 cases, great. In the middle of the peak, New York on certain days was almost at 20,000. It's a different variation. And by the way, Texas has 10 million more people in population than New York does. So it was a different severity, even though the numbers seem big. You know, and you heard the media say it's an all-time record. It only broke the record by 2,000, but at that time, New York and New Jersey were contributing 2/3 of all cases. It was 2 states driving it. That's why it was severe. That's our biggest issue right now, is there's a lot of mixed messaging coming out as we get going. And we have planners saying, okay, I don't know what the rules are. I don't know, depending on which state I'm going to, how many people I can have, what do I have to do if I'm there? It's all of those pieces that are being tied together. We're trying with this Apex group to provide some resources, and you're going to see the first thing that's going to get released from the group in the next 7 days. It's a really, really great piece from the work group on meetings and events. And it also it's a decision matrix and a risk factor matrix, but it's based in science, not on people's emotions. And the risk.
So what are some of the risk factors that you would look for if you're, thinking about planning a meeting at a certain hotel or convention center?
Well, and the risk factors weren't about the hotels. The risk factors were about the states you're going to. What states are you going to, and where are they in this pandemic? And what's really interesting is ignore cases. Cases mean nothing. Cases right now mean nothing unless it's putting people in the hospital and causing fatalities. Cases right now are some of it's increasing. You've heard about testing. It's not just all testing, but it's who we're testing. We're testing asymptomatic people today. When this first started, nobody that didn't have symptoms were being tested. So think about that. In New York and New Jersey, with all their cases, you had asymptomatic people walking around that had COVID, but were never getting tested, because at that time we didn't have enough tests. And everybody said, unless you're sick, unless you're running a fever, don't go get tested, because we don't have enough and we don't want you tested. Well, today, think about California, Florida, Texas. As people are coming back into the workforce, what are we doing? We're testing all these employees. What are we finding? A lot of asymptomatic people that are positive, but a positive case doesn't mean much. What does mean something is hospitalizations and then fatalities. And the number one risk factor, and you'll see this, and by the way, the groups that put this together are major corporate planning groups that literally have doctors that are in infectious disease that are advising them. The key is deaths per population. It's deaths per million in your area. That is the overall indicator of how severe the disease is. Cases are going to vary and have a lot of variables in it. When it was tested, when the results come back, which test was used. There's so many variables, and that's where I think the media is completely irresponsible. They're focusing on cases and scaring everybody, and cases don't mean anything. And the thing we're looking at is fatalities. Fatalities and percentage of fatalities to your population will be the metric of what level you're in. And by the way, that's what doctors look at, because that's telling you the severity of the disease. And it's an easy one to look at, but you'll have a level 1, level 2, level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1. And basically level 4 means you are having more than 2 deaths per million over a 14-day average. So in Texas, that means you're averaging more than 50 people a day over a 14-day window. We're not anywhere near that number. So that is where there's this hypersensitivity around what's happening. And those are going to be the risk factors that are thrown out. And it's a risk decision tree that tells you, look, if you're level 4, you should probably have a virtual meeting if you were trying to go to that state and that was your only option. You probably shouldn't travel because it's saying they're at the height of their outbreak. But then you're going to have level 3, and level 3 is like, yep, no, you can go, but you need to make sure that these standards are in place. And then level 2 is pretty much where we're at with most of the country right now.
What's
For those
the
levels,
source for finding their level?
CDC
The
and Johns
CDC.
Hopkins, they're there. That's kind of the digging I do every week and every day, Jill, for our teams, because I'm showing them the day-by-day fatalities, and then you can look at a 7-day moving average to see exactly what that looks like.
Is that broken down by city or strictly by state?
It's by state, and then you can go by county, but you're looking at it state particularly, and then you can go by county and city. But look, the numbers, since this is a lot of geeks, the numbers are just statistically driven. Your biggest cities are going to drive the number. If your number is over that, it's because, let's take Texas. If you get to that metric, it's because Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio are there. Nothing else is going to move the needle. So think about that in any major city. New York's a great example. Manhattan moved the needle because it's 13 million of their 19 million residents. So it's always going to be the major city, if that makes sense, Leighton. It's the major cities that will drive it.
Yeah, I'm kind of just thinking, if you're planning something in a certain city, if it's, just kind of what precautions you want to look at, what metrics you want to look at, and even going down to the hotel, like what is the staff doing to plan for conferences and getting things rolling again?
Look, there's a lot of detail on that, and look, the precautions are pretty simple. Everybody knows it. Wear a mask, stay away from people, and wash your hands. Those are as simple as you can state it, and every doctor will keep saying the same thing. Those are the three components that mean something. And there's a great debate in this country about masks. What we're finding is wearing a mask, and not long term, you shouldn't be wearing it 24/7, but the idea was, if you listen to CDC, and by the way, the CDC guidelines, CDC has listed or just released guidelines for events and large gatherings. In that, what it says is wear your mask where you can't keep 6 feet of social distancing. So the point is, let's say we set up a room, and we have this set up now. Let's say we're setting up a room classroom style, and it's set up for 6 feet of social distancing. Well, once you're in the room and seated and everybody else is, you should be able to remove your mask. As long as you're not moving, you are seated in an area that's keeping you 6 feet from anybody else around you. That's kind of the thought process. But then you're going to get up and you're moving to your breakouts. Put the mask back on, and knowing when you're moving and you're in traffic, you want to wear your mask and still try to keep distancing, but it's going to be harder for you to kind of maintain it. I've seen in some of the programmings, and this is technology, you're now having badges that have alerts, and it lights up literally when anybody's within 6 feet of you, and it vibrates to remind you that you're getting too close to people and you need to back off. Those type of things are going to be great. I'm just waiting for someone to create an app that'll do that on our phone, because then I don't need to put it on my badge. We just download the app and we get it done. But those are going to be some advances you're going to see. It's reminding people, and everything's behavioral. Where I'm encouraged is that, they always say it takes 21 days to build a habit. Well, we're going to have 210 days to form that habit. But by the time this is all over, we've spent a lot of time washing our hands, being careful, keeping our distance from people. I think some of it's going to be habitual in the future. You won't even think about it. And that's not a bad thing. Some of the silver linings to me, I think we'll have a softer flu season because people are washing their hands more and being very cognizant of the environment we're in. And, we tend to forget the tens of thousands of people we lose every year to the flu. And those are going to be some positives that come out of it. There's a whole bunch of protocol going in. Candidly, the hotels didn't have to change much. They just had to make sure that on surfaces, we're making sure we're using equipment that is antiviral. And not only antiviral, because some of this is placebo effect for you. Some of the things that you hear, it makes you feel better. It's not going to be impactful. And what we're making sure is, I can say I'm using an antibacterial cleaner. I bet most of you say, "Oh, that's awesome." Really? Because this is a virus. That's not going to kill it. But it's an antibacterial cleaner, and it sounds really cool. But that's kind of the thought process. We have to go back and say, no, I need to have a material or a chemical that actually kills the virus. And what do we know? A 70% solution of alcohol and water kills it. Well, I don't need something really fancy. I just need to have that chemical to make sure that can happen. So those are the things that are happening. I think the biggest thing to me is the industry has had to flip on its head what we've always done. We've always cleaned at night and behind the scenes. It's now front and center because you want to see it as a consumer. And that's a shift for the meetings in this, for the hotel industry, the lodging industry as a whole. That is the biggest piece, because we've always cleaned. We've just done it behind the scenes. And I promise you, like, I've been traveling. When you travel now, you see people cleaning everywhere. And you're in a hotel and people are cleaning around you, and nobody's trying to hide it. That was never the experience you necessarily wanted in the past. Today we do. Same with the airlines. Nobody's going to complain that you're waiting an extra 10 minutes as they desanitize the airplane. In the past, we would have been barking because we're waiting for 10 minutes for our plane to be clean before we can start boarding. So you're seeing a lot of work that's going on across the way. But the simplest things I can't stress enough: wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep your distance. If you do that, you're in a great place.
Hey, Mike, I got a question.
I thought you were going to show. I thought you were showing me, Jeff, that your hands were washed. I'm like, I believe.
Yeah, see, there.
You're
a whistle. No, just had a question. Do you remember anything like where somebody would look up that badge you were mentioning of that lit up and maybe vibrated or whatever?
The name of it?
Yeah.
No, I don't know it offhand, the brand, but I'll send it to you guys and follow up.
Okay, good. We'll share that. I Googled it and I didn't see anything.
Yeah, and I don't think. And I do see the chat. I don't think Tito's is strong enough to kill it, but
what if I had a double?
It's 40%, I think.
So it would take a double.
Yeah. If it did, you would just be told to gargle with it. So we would kill the droplets. We'd be fine.
Well, they were saying that you should go ahead and drink antiseptic, right?
Drink?
No. Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. Not working.
No,
Drinking.
definitely not a good idea. You may
One
not
question we got
get COVID,
on the
but you'll die from poisoning. So it will help you from getting COVID. It's just not going to help you live. That's not something you want to be doing.
I don't think you can get COVID if you're dead.
No.
So one question we got on the registration is, what are you seeing in respect to corporate groups coming back, like a time frame?
Look, again, we're seeing a lot of groups between now and the end of the year. 21 is exploding, as everybody would expect, and we're well ahead on 21. There seems to be very little hesitation on 21. It's all between now and the fall and how they do it. Your largest, unfortunately, you know who's been the largest group of people that just aren't going to meet and want to meet virtually are tech companies. Your largest tech companies have decided they're not going to meet face to face until middle of next year at the earliest. And,
yeah, Apple's doing their big developers conference all virtual.
Yeah, but that's now. I'm talking about moving into next year. I'm talking about 21. And for 20, that didn't surprise me. And, everybody went there for 20 on these large meetings because there's no way, you don't have states that would approve that size of, meeting right now. But I'm talking about in 21, you've had IBM announce they're not doing anything through 21. You've had Microsoft not doing anything until the summer of 21. That's going to be face to face. Facebook isn't doing anything till middle of 21. So it's the largest tech companies, surprisingly. Financial, insurance that you would think would be more risk averse, they're actually moving forward, and they're having meetings. And there's a hybrid component to everything between now and the end of 2020. That's here, and I think that's going to be here to stay long term.
Yeah, that's a great point, and actually one of our questions as well. What does that look like? Is a hotel on the hook for becoming a TV studio now, or is a planner expected to produce that?
Actually, the planner is going to be doing that. That's the planner's call if they're going to do it. And by the way, if you look at the planner, one of the reasons they're going hybrid between now and the end of the year is because they're worried about a portion of their attendance that won't travel for a variety of reasons. They may be restricted. They can't, whether it's business restrictions, whether it's state or federal restrictions, all kinds of reasons they may not travel. They may be in the high risk group, which would be 65 and over with underlying conditions, and they may not want to travel. So with them setting that up, the reason I'm mentioning it is they're saving cost on one end and they're going to gain cost on another. And that is setting up for the virtual component. What we are seeing more than anything, though, even in the face-to-face, is people are having to reconfigure their meetings because of the social distancing requirements. So, we're going to eat up some space, and it's not a third. I hear people say, well, I'm only going to get a third of my space. No, we've done the math. It's between 50 and 60% of what your attendance was before you can get in the same rooms. And it depends on a variety of sets. But I've also challenged the meeting planning community. I said, they always gave us a cube and would say, make this cube fit in your meeting space. And I remind them today, it's a Rubik's Cube. You're still giving me a cube, but it's now Rubik's, because I'm going to have to keep moving these sides until it all lines up. And the reason I say that, we've actually had people think about this a little bit in a broader perspective. Your greatest concentration of transmission, where you're crossing people and there's movement, is for general sessions. Your biggest eat up of space are general sessions that you traditionally use for an hour and a half total in a day, if that. So the idea is, we have a lot of groups saying, you know what, send everyone to their breakouts, and we're going to broadcast the general session into the breakouts, because I'm stopping traffic. I'm stopping a lot of people moving. And at the same time, I'm getting all that space back, which makes it much easier for me to spread out my breakouts and make them a little bit larger and get the room I need. The other thing I've seen is a general session that all TVs have an open channel. So the general session is like, everybody stay in the room in the morning. We're going to broadcast the general session to your guest room. And once the general session is done, come on down and we'll start to look at your breakouts. That is a look at it a little differently, that one, frees up space, but two, also restricts cross-pollination. That's what you're trying to avoid. And that's your biggest time to use it. But those are things people don't think about. And in today's world, who's going to care about having a general session broadcast in?
Someone who slept through a lot of general morning sessions, that sounds great. I can just watch it in bed.
Yeah, seriously, it makes a lot of sense. And it's rethinking the space, rethinking your program. And, yesterday the question was asked, because it's like, what are you doing with elevators in hotels? Because, if I have a group that's breaking and they're all trying to get to their rooms, what does that look like? I said, well, if you understand how hotels operate and how those things operate, I can program the elevators. So let's say I have 8 elevator banks. I can have 6 of the 8 or even 7 of the 8 all moving one direction. If anybody's ever seen some cities do this with highways, where you have rush hour, they turn certain lanes the opposite way so that they can move more traffic, knowing traffic's going one way. Kind of the same thing. If you have a big group in house and everybody's breaking, I can have 7 of the elevators all moving up and only 1 elevator coming down. And when I said that, somebody's like, all elevators move up and down. I mean, they won't stop at the floor. If somebody's pushing the button to go down, they won't stop there. And that's how you can move traffic. And no, I'm still going to keep separation, but I'm going to be able to move people around. And then I got well, that's going to take longer. And I said, then you may need a longer break. At the end of the day, you're giving them 30 minutes, make it an hour. Again, you've got to rethink your program. And I go, and I promise nobody's going to miss the 20 minutes of content that they fell asleep with anyway, because it was too long to begin with. It'll force people to reprogram just a bit. And I think that's going to be important. We think of everything in hours. Think of presentations now in 35 to 40 minutes and get that extra 20 minutes back so that you can move around as you need to. You're going to need the extra 20 minutes for breaks as well. If you're going to keep social distancing, you need a little more time. But it's incumbent upon the planner to rethink that just a bit.
Yeah, and if you think about it with hybrid meetings too, like, we all know this, like, drudging, like being on Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, like those people attending in some sort of hybrid space. I mean, that benefits them too.
I completely agree. And, for someone who is on call after call on Zoom, even this, we literally back up every call to an hour. I didn't know if I was going to make it completely on time, Jill, because I had to pee. And I'm sorry, it's like, there's no way I can wait an hour. And I go from this one into another one, and there's no time in between, 0.
We were getting a bit worried about you.
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to send you a note that I'll be there. I need a health break for a second. I'll be right there. But it's even what you just saying. You're going back to back to back. We don't even think about that in this world. Yet you probably need a little bit of time, especially if you're having speakers that might be on multiple calls back to back. And I've been doing that back to back to back every day for a variety in certain spots. And it's kind of the same thing. We need to rethink things. And that's it's my best advice, but I'm hearing sometimes, what are the hotels going to do? And it's like, this is what we're doing, but what are you going to do? Because we need you to rework it as well and be innovative in this time frame to know that we can make this work between now and the end of the year.
Another thought is that hybrid meetings can go both ways. You don't have to bring a physical speaker to your event. If they're, I mean, that was a trend we were seeing even before COVID, that, you know, it's just cheaper not to bring them in if you have a big speaker that wants to call in.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's one of the silver linings out of all of this is the people that had not gone to hybrid, usually it's because they were afraid of it or didn't have the time to work through it because everybody was so busy. Well, now they've gotten the time back, and because of everything they're doing, they're not as afraid of it. And I think that's a silver lining, because moving forward, hybrid expands your event. Hybrid expands your face-to-face opportunities. And I think that's going to be a real positive as we move forward, because hybrid is here to stay. But I do impress on people. We trained our team. I had a virtual all-staff meeting last week that was supposed to be face-to-face originally. But the reason I did that was I actually went back and I wanted our GSOs to understand what a virtual meeting was, because there's too many people right now that, you know, think of Zoom as a virtual meeting. This is us getting together virtually, but it's not a virtual meeting. And I've been explaining to people, Zoom will replace the crappy conference call we've all been on. This is a much better format than anything along those lines where we're, you know, speaking into a box. But we do see the opportunity, and we wanted our GSOs to see it, where all of a sudden they saw the lobby, they saw the general session, they saw the breakouts, they knew where they were supposed to be going at what time of the meeting. That was an important one, because we want our GSOs to be able to be advisors and partners to the planner community is trying to figure it out. Because what we've also found, and speaking to a group of techies, what we also found out that I think is interesting, we've heard this from planners. There's a lot of people that sell platform, say, I've got this great virtual platform, great, but they don't have anybody on staff to help, to understand. I actually have to have a planner to help me plan in a virtual space, because it's not as simple as going from physical into virtual if you're going to do it right. And we've heard the frustration from planners. There's a lot of people selling technology. There's very few companies that are saying, we're going to guide you through it. We're going to make sure we've set it up and understand and help you understand what it should look like in this environment. And look, the group we used, what I thought was brilliant, and I haven't seen this in a lot, they had their platform, but they had all speakers coming in through Zoom through their platform. And the reason they did that is because we all know Zoom, and they don't have to teach somebody the mechanics of Zoom, and you don't have to freak out a planner. And, you know, they kind of joked with us that, you know, planners aren't real bright sometimes, or not planners. I'm sorry, speakers. Speakers aren't really bright.
Whoa.
Gotta clarify.
Who are we talking to here?
We're going to hear about that one, Mike.
I know. No. They said speakers aren't always really bright when it comes to technology, that they're not real savvy with it. And if you have to teach them a new program, it gets very cumbersome. And you guys have probably seen it. So you know what I think of planners. I think you guys are more than bright. But this one, I thought that was a great point. And there's a company that's thinking, how do I take one of the obstacles out of play? And the obstacles are trying to teach people that aren't part of your community all the time and only going to be there for a brief period of time. Take an obstacle out that, okay, I can make them really comfortable and into this platform and just integrate it into our other platform. I think that's great. I was on one yesterday for MPI, or it was an Ohio program they did with all the different organizations. It was the most complicated thing, even for me who was moderating it, most complicated thing I've had to do yet. They had to have me on multiple screens, and I have multiple sign-ins, and nothing was ever the same, and it was complicated. And it's because it was an AV production company behind it, putting it on in a production, thinking it's like a live production face-to-face. Because I've been on many of them that the outcome was just as good, if not better, but it didn't have that kind of backbone to it. It was a much simpler process. And that's where I think there's a little bit of rub right now. You know, your AV companies are really good at production, not necessarily in a virtual world and what that space looks like. It's an interesting one. So, you know, creating experiences is something that you have to really think about. It's different right now.
And I will say that is as great as the virtual meeting was that we had, it left you wanting, it lacked the energy that you get from meeting people one-on-one, face-to-face, you know, and that's what I learned from that experience of going, man, this is nothing like being in a meeting and the energy and the brainstorming that happens when you're with people, and you can really connect versus just typing in the chats or do, you know, that kind of thing. So I was really glad that Mike set that up for us to experience it and see. And I think the more people that experience that, the more they're going to miss meeting face to face.
Yeah, and I would agree. To me, that's a given that, you know, we're always going to it's in our DNA for as human beings to get together and to want to interact and engage. You know, and anybody who's ever told me, you know, oh, virtual is going to take over, face-to-face is really going to decline. I always go back to Cisco that created WebEx. They went to literally the people that sell a platform, and it was the first major platform to be able to do virtual. They went to an all virtual sales meeting for 2 years. They've never gone back to it since because they could never accomplish what they needed to face-to-face or virtually what they do face-to-face. So these are the people that actually sell the technology. So it would be in their best interest to convince you that you should be doing everything virtually, and they could not do it. And, you know, and I've spoken to who is now their CEO, Chuck Robbins. He was their SVP of sales at that time. And he just said everything Carrie said. It's the talk in between the sessions. It is you with your peers engaging. That's where the nuggets are and the beauty of face-to-face. It's not always and I always say this, if speakers are doing it right, they should leave you asking a lot of questions and teeing up conversation. That's what their job is, so that dialogue is taking place amongst you and your peers through the rest of the conference.
Yeah, when you have to ask somebody to unmute yourself to ask a question, it's like one more barrier to collaboration. So with that in mind, we're on the back half of this webinar. Does anyone want to speak up and ask Mike a question?
Yeah, this is John Howe, Leighton, and hey, Mike, how are you?
John, you don't even have to introduce yourself. Your voice gives it away, man.
Thank you, I think. Hey,
you got a radio voice.
I'll tell you, one of the things that we find with all of our clients right now is convincing people that it's more than just what the hotel has done to make it safe, make it healthy, et cetera, et cetera. It's the entire journey. From the time you walk out your front door, get in a cab, get in an Uber, take your own car, you go to the parking lot, you park, or you get out, you go to check in, you check your bags, you go through TSA, you walk down, you want to buy a newspaper or a book or something, you go in the little store, you go to the ticket counter, not the ticket counter, but check in, you go on, get on the airplane, you're going through a whole bunch of things, you're in a narrow corridor going down the jetway, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're finding is that probably one of the most persuasive ways of doing it is outlining for people just what that entire journey is going to be like, beginning with leaving your house to getting back to your house or your home. And I think that becomes part of the thing. I think the hotel industry is trying to do a good job with all the sanitation and other requirements that are being self-imposed by them. You have the airlines which are trying to attract people. But a recent survey that was just reported out, people say that's all well and good, but my most fearful part of the whole thing is getting on the airplane because I'm going to be cramped into space, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're seeing now too is that some meeting planners, some hotels, some venues are now requiring people to sign a waiver of liability and assumption of risk for coming to the program. And when we noted that with Trump's deal in Texas or in Oklahoma, we've seen that with his deal in Texas, et cetera, et cetera. So the waiver issue becomes another one. Some resistance is why would I give that away, et cetera. So I think the marketing and just helping people have a full understanding of what that approach is going to be, what's going to take place, and how it's done.
Yeah,
and I would assume your task force is addressing that.
All of it, John. And the funny thing is, it's not about outlining it. What we've seen is it's about video. People need to see it. They don't want to read it. They want to see it.
I could not agree with you more. I think one of the most effective hotel sales devices now is showing what a room looks like with real people or mannequins even being in place as to what that setup is going to be like.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the mission. And I've traveled the last 3 weeks. I'm actually jumping on a plane this afternoon again it'll be 4 weeks in a row. And I'm doing it to catalog it. And you can see the interest. My very first LinkedIn posting 3 weeks ago when I traveled, it's had 34,000 views and more than 1,200 interactions and probably about 80 because people were interested. And they wanted to see that, wow, people are traveling or somebody's traveling. And I'm documenting the travel. And what John just explained is, I think as people start to see it, it's a little overplayed that people won't get on a plane. They don't want to. We have tripled TSA throughput traffic in 3 weeks as people were allowed to start moving. Tripled. Delta Airlines just announced 1,400 flights they're adding for July. Southwest is adding another 1,000 flights for July. They wouldn't be adding it unless they saw the demand for it. And we're seeing that. And they are flying at lower load factors. That's good. But you're starting to see people moving very quickly as we start to do it. Hotels in the US are now at 42% occupancy when we bottomed out at 20. So you're looking in literally a 6 to 8 week window with us tripling those numbers. So things are going really quicker as we move. And to John's point, the one thing I've learned, and where you sit in the US really has dictated how you think about travel and moving and what that entire risk looks like. If you were in that Northeast corridor, it is a very different world than being outside that Northeast corridor. And when I do the updates on a daily and weekly basis, if you do cases by population, your top 7 states are all that Northeast corridor. Top 7 states as far as cases based on your population. By the way, in the news, California, Texas, and Florida, they don't make the top 30 when you look at cases by population. And that's where you're saying it's a different experience depending on where you've been. Doesn't mean it's not serious. It doesn't mean people aren't paying attention to it. But if you've listened to the news, in Texas, there's spikes in hospitalizations, and the news has made this so scary. Less than 10% of people in Texas hospitals are COVID patients. Less than 10%. If you've watched the news, you would not know that. You would think that the hospitals are being flooded right now with COVID patients. Now, COVID patients are increasing, but you have 40,000 other people in hospitals for a variety of reasons. Elective surgeries being one, which they'll start to pull back on if this starts to move again. And I think it's an important part of the conversation. COVID is here to stay. It's not going away. Everybody talks about a vaccine. Polio is the only disease we've ever gotten rid of. So guess what? It's going to be here in some form or fashion. You would hope that it continues to diminish as we move forward, but it's learning how to live with it. And I do implore on people, as you start watching the news, please take the time to go watch the governor's press conferences in Florida, Texas, and Arizona, and California to understand what the numbers really are and what's driving them, and know that they have a handle county by county, zip code by zip code, knowing what is going on and where the issues are. I say that because our national media, unlike Cuomo we saw every day, aren't covering Texas, Florida, and Arizona in a broad spectrum. You don't get to see their press conferences. You don't get to hear them go through the numbers and explain it. And when I tell you I'm frustrated with the media, 2 weeks ago when it was all about Texas, Florida, and Arizona, California had the most cases in the states 3 days in a row. And yet they were talking about Texas, Florida, and Arizona. Why? Because they kept saying it's because they opened up too soon. California hadn't opened up, yet they were leading in cases, and that wasn't making the news report. So that's where I'm saying there's a narrative. And it doesn't mean the cases aren't there. Doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to it, but there's a narrative on how it's being spoken to. It's not all because they opened up too fast. They can pinpoint right now Memorial Day. Memorial Day and people probably gathering together and partying is what probably spiked in a lot of different areas. And you're starting to see it decline in 6 states while it was still starting to level off in others. So there's just more to the numbers and more to the news. And that's hard because what John was talking about is getting people's confidence back. It's hard to get the confidence when you're up against this, literally this headwind of news that continues to come at you that isn't talking about, hey, TSA through. Have you ever heard it reported that TSA throughput has tripled, in 3 weeks? That people are actually traveling, and that's what we're even hearing from planners. They want to know who else is meeting. They don't want to be the first person off the cliff. You want to know the person jumped and didn't die. So that's kind of the thought process. You're watching people jump off a cliff and into the ocean. You want to make sure it's safe, and if you can do that, then you're going to go. We're seeing a lot of that. So it is being able to document it, being able to showcase it. I'm not traveling because I want to. I'm not trying to be risky when I travel. My mask is on the whole time. I'm conscious of my hands. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. I don't feel unsafe. And I've traveled on every airline except United. And not because it's United, just I haven't gotten there yet. But I'm traveling on all the airlines to see, is the experience the same? Does it feel the same? Are they having the same protocol? And it is. Across the board. The only thing I can tell you is American is packing them in more than a Southwest and Delta. Delta has committed to a 60% load factor, and Southwest has committed to leave all the middle seats open. American, they've been busy. They've been on planes that they're almost full. If they're not full, they're really thinking about how they space people out. But there are other times that they are full. Now, they are giving you the option when they get that full to say, would you like to take another flight? So you are getting.
Mike, one thing is the last great pandemic we had was the Spanish flu in 1918. What followed the Spanish flu in the 1918, 1990? It was the Roaring 20s. So hopefully we might see sort of history repeat itself relative to that kind of approach in the whole industry.
Yeah, I would agree, John. And the one thing that's been overlooked by the media, the last pandemic of note for the U.S. was actually, because it was a global pandemic, but for the U.S. was the Hong Kong flu of 1968, not the Spanish flu. And I firmly believe the media goes there because that's the scariest thing they can find, because 1.5 million people, apparently died from it in the U.S. as they were estimating it. Spanish flu, 1968, here are the numbers. 100,000 Americans died. We only had 220 million Americans at that time frame. So if you look at it based on population, it was deadlier than COVID-19. And by the way, 70 million Americans were infected during that time frame. 1968 was also Woodstock. It wasn't canceled. Woodstock still happened, and it was a different time frame. But you know what was different in the media? Outside of social media, we had the Vietnam War. And you had a war being showcased on the news for the first time live, and we had never experienced that. The virus got buried in the headlines. I've shown on my weekly updates for everybody here, I know this will surprise you, we have had more people die from pneumonia than COVID between February 1st and June 3rd, according to the CDC, in every age category. And yet that's not reported. There's been over 1.1 million Americans that have died during that time frame. Less than 10% of those are COVID related. And that's where I think it's not that it's not dangerous. It's not that it's not a problem. It is a real risk to a particular age group. And in addition to that, I think Bill Maher said it really well. There's no reason to put hot sauce on a jalapeno. And I think that's what the media has done. They've made us more fearful of what else the disease is. Yes, we need to be cautious. Yes, we need to follow all the precautions given to us. But when you look at the pure data, if you really analyze the data, I'm really having issue with them, the media consistently calling this the deadly disease. It is a deadly virus to a very, very succinct proportion of the population. And I mean overly deadly. And I am not discounting any death. That's not what I'm talking. I'm just looking at the numbers and putting it in perspective, because we have 2.5 million Americans that die every year for a variety of causes. That is the issue when I start to line it up. And no, I'm not saying it's the flu. I'm not going down that argument. What I am saying is we've had more people die from pneumonia than we have from COVID during this same time frame. And that's an interesting data point for me when I look at that. And the CDC has revised the mortality rate, where they expect the mortality rate to be 0.03. That's getting into flu territory versus the 3.5% mortality rate they were predicting when it first came out. And that I'm not blaming the scientists. It's a novel virus. We're learning as we go. And there's a lot of information that we have to continue to learn as we go. But what we're learning right now, it's not as deadly to a universal audience as we thought it was. And here's the best news of all I can give you. It came up in a Florida press conference yesterday, and Italian and German doctors had mentioned this a while back. In Italy, they are finding current cases of coronavirus today are weaker than the coronavirus they saw in February. And it's telling the scientists that the virus is getting weaker as it transmits. The more it transmits, the weaker it becomes. By the way, the head doctor in Orlando was literally with the governor yesterday and was explaining they're seeing the same thing in Florida. That one of the reasons cases are just spiking, but hospitalizations aren't following that, and more specifically, deaths aren't following that. He's explaining that the potency of the virus right now is not as strong as what they were seeing 60 or 90 days again. And since you guys again are into data, look at every curve around the world. Every curve looks pretty much the same. It may spike a little higher, it may go a little deeper or wider. Regardless of when they shut down, how long they shut down, the curve is going to last 120 to 180 days everywhere. Well, when I see that, that tells me that there might be that thought, and I'm hoping they find it. They're studying it, but that would tell me that the virus may get weaker as it continues to transmit. And they're starting to have evidence of that. And the reason I say that is Peru locked down their country with 7,000 cases. It was one of the more aggressive lockdowns in the world. And they were the second largest outbreak in Latin America, even though they locked down the country before it got going. And we're finding that around the globe. And I'm not saying you don't shut down. When you shut down matters. Not just shutting it down early. It's going to come. You're going to get your wave. Locking it down, if you remember, was about flattening the curve, not getting rid of it. You've never heard anyone say get rid of the curve. We talk about flatten the curve. That means over a long period of time, we want lots of cases versus the cases coming all at one time, because that's what we saw in New York. When it came all at one time in New York, the hospital system couldn't manage it. That's when you're seeing filled hospitals being built. That's when you see the military coming in. It couldn't be scarier if you tried, because that's what we got to visualize and then realize that's not what the rest of the country experienced. And I will tell you, I don't have the data to back this up, but here's my opinion. When you look at the worst outbreaks, it's been Europe and it's been that Northeast corridor. What's common in both of those? Mass transportation between subways and trains, and then density and population. Now you have a large population in Texas, California, and Florida, but everybody drives. Nobody takes mass transit. Where mass transit has existed, it has been the worst forms of the outbreak we have seen. And it's the only correlation I can put together outside of density, but density exists in a lot of different places.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike. I think we could all listen to you talk for another hour, but we are at the end of the hour that we had pre-planned for you.
Well, what's scary, Layton, is I could talk for another hour. That's the hard part.
I know.
I was saying 5 hours.
5 hours? I thought you were just giving a virtual high five.
No, I wasn't holding my hand up. I was saying I could listen to Mike for 5 hours, and probably have.
Like I hope this is helpful. I try to. The one thing I'll leave you with is I always say I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I just refuse to be Eeyore. I'm trying to hit something right down the middle. You know, it's the best I can do.
I'm going for Mike D for president.
I can't do it. I always say my wife has too much baggage. It can't happen. It would all come out when it's all done. And by the way, I'm the baggage. Just to clarify, but it's all good.
Well, thank you, Mike. You were brilliant as always. And thanks everyone else for joining us. Can we get a round of applause for Mike, everyone?
Guys, thank you, and happy to come back anytime. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. That was awesome.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Everybody have a good one.
Thanks.
So just a reminder, if you signed up for our Words with Nerds, which is our one-on-one breakout sessions with one of our AMI nerds, please stay on the call. And if you didn't pre-register, you can still hang out after the call and we'll fix you up. Go ahead and mark your calendars for 2 weeks from now, July 9th. We're going to host a panel of planners pivoting and picking the perfect platform precisely parlayed with painless production processes. I don't know what that means. I have the thesaurus and I look for P words.
Could you
But
say
it's
it
gonna be
again
great.
3 times?
No, just because of the time. And then on July 23rd, 4 weeks from now, we have 4 weeks? We have Corbin Ball joining us. He is our good friend and a tech wizard. So please consider joining us for those 2 webinars. And don't forget to check our archives at attendingnet.com/archive. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.